Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Yankee and Canuck podcast, Best Picture Winner Series, where we review the Best Picture winners from 1927 to the present.
And I'm your host, a Yankee.
And I'm your host, a Canuck.
And today we're going to be talking about Cavalcade. It is
Cavalcade.
Cavalcade. It is the sixth Best Picture winner. It won 3 Academy Awards. The other 2 awards being Best Director and Best Art Direction.
Yep.
So basically, this is a film about this boring-ass affluent family in London, and we follow the main affluent family and their servants, and it deals with them going through major events of time during that era, which is the Second Boer War, the death of Queen Victoria, the sinking of the Titanic, World War I. It also deals with the historic flight of Louis Blériot, who was the guy who flew over the English Channel. It was a big historic event or something.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's as the name suggests, it's just like a series of vignettes through this family, times in history, and we're led along these events. And this movie, I hated it. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to be opening this beer, and this is how I'm going to be coping this entire episode, because this film was atrocious, to say the very least.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's essentially, about the highs and lows of these 2 British families, and from 2 different classes. They try to get clever with it, with, the historical events, and then connecting it, directly impacting these 2 families, and they succeed in some elements of it, and then
I'm curious to see where you think this film succeeded, because I just saw nothing but failure from beginning to end.
Yeah, and other than that, it really is just a bunch of awful things happening to these families, and you just watching them as they go along with time, and
going off with these monologues and just like, oh my god, tragedy left and right. Yeah, such is life. What makes you guys any special? I don't know.
Yeah, there are some things in there, like there's some anti-war messaging. It's a little bit more subtle than some of the other movies we've talked about, like Wings and All Quiet on the Western Front. But yeah, I look at this movie and it's really just kind of just about change, right? And change in society, change over time, change in the attitudes, whether about war or class and whatnot. And they just, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like,
at least that's what they're trying to convey to the audience. They don't really successfully do it, but
well, it may have succeeded back then, because this is a film that probably resonates with you better if you were an audience member in 1933.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Especially if you were the English variety, because there seems to be more lopsided towards English affairs than any other affairs in world history. I read the play also, because why not? And the play is really no different from the movie. There's a few minor differences, obviously, but for the most part, this movie plays it note for note, and it was a very popular play. It played for a whole year, and that led to the adaptation, and it led to this film being made. How it led to winning Best Picture, you got me, man. I don't know, man. I don't know why this thing won Best Picture. Apparently, no one seems to know except for people of the era. The only thing I could surmise is that it was a fairly big hit at the time when it was released, and the play was popular. So I guess it's just another thing of, like, it's a popularity contest. It was the same thing with Broadway Melody. It was the same thing with Cimarron. It was the same thing with Grand Hotel. And you could probably make an argument that Grand Hotel is more prestigious out of all those choices. It's still fondly remembered compared to the other ones, even though I absolutely hated it. But the thing is, it's like, I think popularity probably played a big part in this thing winning. Yeah, but all that being said, the 6 Academy Awards, whereas the last one and the one before that were complete and utter disasters because they were still trying to figure stuff out, this is where they started getting into, all right, we're going to be a little bit more organized now. At this point, they were trying to establish some sort of a standard here. So they actually expanded the Academy Award nomination list to include films from August 1st, 1932 to December 31st, 1933. So they expanded it a little bit bigger just so they can include more films. So there were way more films in contention this time around. And the host, I don't know about the host for the other ones. None of the stuff was really properly filmed or televised in any kind of way. This was the early 30s after all. The guy who was hosting the Oscars was Will Rogers, who was a well-known comedian, vaudevillian, and all that stuff. And the only noteworthy thing about the Academy Awards during this time was that he was kind of a joker. Like at one point when presenting Best Director, he opened the envelope and he just said, "Come and get it, Frank." And Frank Capra thought he won, so we went up and he was like, "Oh no, not you. I was talking about Frank Lloyd, who's the guy who directed this piece of shit we're talking about." So he did that, and then he did a similar thing with the Best
That's pretty
Actors.
messed up.
Yeah, it's supposed to be funny, but this is kind of like it was kind of like Ricky Gervais, like level edgelord humor. You know what I mean? Except he wasn't that disparaging. Another time he did this was with the Best Actress nominees. He summoned two of them up there, two of the ladies who were up for the award, and and they thought they both won. It was a tie because that happened, back in what was that time? It was Grand Hotel, I believe, that around that time, where those two actors that won Best Actor, one who was in Grand Hotel and the guy who won for Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, like that was a legitimate tie. So they thought, oh, this is another tie. But when he brought him up, he's like, thank you for coming up, ladies. Just want to let you know that I thank you for your performances. It was great, but you didn't win. Actually, Katharine Hepburn won, who actually wasn't there. So I was like, okay, this is you're being an asshole, bro. But again, he was just probably trying to be funny, whatever. So
yeah, true.
As far as I was able to see in my research, that was the only noteworthy thing that happened in the Academy Awards. Because other than that, this film was just largely and wholly unremarkable.
Yeah, I mean, before we do move on to discussing the film, I do want to mention once again, there's all these other awesome movies that came out that year, and of course, the Academy or whatever didn't give any love to those movies. I mean, you got Invisible Man. I've seen that a few times.
That's a great movie, yeah.
King Kong came out that year. I mean, come on. The actress in King Kong, she was actually in another movie in 33 that I've seen, Mystery of the Wax Museum. Also a very good movie. That's the same director who did Jazz Singer and Casablanca. But none of those movies were nominated for anything, and these are really great movies that I highly recommend.
That is a travesty, to say the very least.
Yeah, I mean, those movies are where it's at. I mean, the other ones nominated, I think the only other one I've seen is the Charles Lofton one, the Henry VIII one. I've seen that movie, and it's actually a pretty good film, but I don't know. There was, 6 other movies nominated? I have no idea.
Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Oh, there you go.
Like I told you, they cast a wide net for this Academy Awards.
Yeah, and they couldn't put King Kong up there or Invisible Man or.
No, because at the end of the day, they're genre films, and even to this day, the Academy Awards don't respect genre films at all.
True.
They lift their little nose up at them. Oh, big monkey. Oh, who wants to see that? Oh, an Invisible Man. Oh, who wants to see that? Well, apparently millions of people. That's why these films resonate. Decades later, if not centuries later. Who the watches Cavalcade, for Christ's sake? Come on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but this is not the first time, obviously, that the Academy Awards have nominated a piece of shit as Best Picture. It's not going to be the last time either, unfortunately.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
yeah, we're covering it every time, and we always have other movies to mention that came out that year, and none of them were even considered.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's a good thing that it's being mentioned because someone has to. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of fans of film and movies they know what's up.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to film, I mean, the fans carry the films.
Yeah, exactly.
You could probably argue maybe critics do, but it's largely the fans because critics can love all kinds of things left and right. But, if the audience doesn't care, the film dies.
Yeah.
Then it just becomes a relic of history. And maybe if you're a film historian, that maybe has some resonance for you in terms of, on that standpoint. But, other than that, the regular person's not going to care.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because in terms of films that were nominated, you mentioned The Private Life of Henry VIII. That seemed interesting. Yeah. There's also
it's a good movie.
It was also Farewell.
Acted very well too.
Is it? There you go. Then you also had
Charles Lofton, phenomenal actor.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen these other ones, but there was also Farewell to Arms, which was written by Ernest Hemingway. You have 22nd Street, which was a musical film. Something called I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. So you had other films here. Little Women was another one, based on the book. You have a lot of films here that seem very interesting. But for some reason, this thing won. Of course, we got into a little bit of the reason why. Truly, I don't know if we're ever going to know unless there's something out there that I haven't read yet. Maybe politics played a part. Who knows? That seems to be the case with the Academy Awards, even in this early incarnation of it. Politics is a factor. But yeah, all that being said, let's get right into the actual film, I guess.
No, let's not. Let's just call it a podcast right here. We don't need to talk about this movie.
Yeah, okay, we'll call it a day. All right, guys. So be sure to follow us on.
Let's jump 2 more years to Mutiny on the Bounty.
You're not gonna get away with this. No, you're not gonna pull a fast one on me. We're getting right through this one. You hear me?
All right. Take it easy, man. Take it easy.
No. Okay.
All right, man.
Anyway, so let's get into the actual film. So, as I mentioned, it's about an affluent family and their servants, their butler and their maid. They're all living together in London somewhere. And around the time when the film begins, it's around the time of the Second Boer War, which I never heard of before in my life.
It's really just the South African War. The first Boer War was probably a century before that. I love history. You know that, and you will all know that too. All this historical, anyways,
tell us more, Uncle Canuck.
But yeah, so around this time, 1899 to I think 1903 was the Second Boer War, obviously between 2 imperial powers and like the British Empire and the Boer republics in South Africa. So,
well,
so yeah, like you said, the movie leads right into that, and then they're called the
two main guys, the servant Alfred, funnily enough, and Robert, who is the patriarchal of the wealthy affluent family. So they're called into it, and it's the same thing where like, we have to go to war because it's right, and that's what men do. We go to war and we fight for our country, blah blah blah. The same jingoistic crap that we saw in All Quiet on the Western Front, but it's clearly better done in All Quiet on the Western Front.
It's also totally different. I mean, especially with a war like this, this is just sheer imperialism and so this is just, obviously there's their national pride and, we must fight for the Queen and we must fight for England, for our empire.
Yeah, the patriotic crap, yeah.
The sun never sets on the English Empire or whatever, British Empire, Queen said.
Oh, boy.
They have to maintain that one way, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, just like, but that's why they go into war. It's no different from modern times, really, if we really think about it. But that happens, and so they're off to war, and then they're like, "Oh no, our husbands are off to war. What would we do?" Oh! So the wives are basically doing that. So all that stuff happens, but then they come back basically unscathed, and the butler opens up like a pub, Alfred, and so. And around the time when he, they open that and all that stuff, and they come back and they celebrate his coming back or whatever. That's when Queen Victoria dies, and that's like a big thing or whatever, which I'm sure it was in real life.
Huge.
So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but they show like a whole procession, a big parade of people.
A big cavalcade.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, a big cavalcade of people. But you don't even see you don't even see the march or anything, it's just like you see the family reacting to it. And
you most of the movie is just looking at their faces. And it's funny because this is based off a play, right? You mentioned it's obvious sometimes in the movie because I feel like sometimes they forget it's a movie and not a play because they're constantly looking at the camera, even when they're having conversations with each other. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing, man? Why are you looking at me?
That's so funny. I missed that entirely.
There's a couple parts like that, and I'm like, ooh. And I gather that, obviously some of these actors are probably theater actors as well. And, and it's still relatively new with talkies. And so, I mean, I get it, but and this is based off a play. And
yeah.
So, I mean, but
yeah,
it gets distracting sometimes. And I'm like, come on, man.
Well, like I said, I totally missed that. But another thing, too, is that the budget for this film was about $1 million, which around that time is equivalent to $23 million, right?
That's a lot.
It is a lot. You can kind of see where the money went in some places. And other times you're just kind of like, huh? This cost this much? For the things that I just mentioned, too, I mean, like, we needed more reaction shots of them. I mean, they were looking at it from their balcony or something. So
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the logistics of that couldn't work out. I don't know. But that happens, and then there is a funny scene, and it's in the play too, where Well, I say it's funny, but it's funny and also kind of creepy and sad. Where Alfred, the butler, somehow just gets drunk, and he's like a big drunkard. And I don't know. I guess you're supposed to assume that war changed him, and he has PTSD or something, and that's why he became a drunk. I don't know. He just becomes a
Mm,
drunk. That's all I
in the
know.
in the movie, it doesn't really specify. So when he returns from the Boer War, Robert, I think, was knighted for his service. Alfred wasn't. But they got enough money, like you said, he started opened a pub up. And years, I remember the movie is always it's a times going by in the movie, and they make that very clear. And he definitely succumbs to alcoholism, and you see moments where even in business, he's like, "Oh, I'm off to meeting an investor" or something like that, and then the regulars at the pub are like, "No, no, come on, open the doors for us. We'll have a quick pint, and you can go about your day." And he's like, "Okay," but of course he's ends up staying at the bar and getting drunk and probably
Okay,
missing the.
so it's
So
just he just gets drunk because he gets peer pressured into it.
combination of that, and then he just probably habit, and then it just becomes habit forming, and I mean, they don't really specify all that. Maybe the war did have an impact of it. Wouldn't be surprised, but
Yeah,
there's a
I'm
but
just
they
I'm just
there's
assuming.
they insinuate some things, but at least in the film, the play, I'm not sure, but
It's
there isn't like a major decline. He kind of goes from this to, ooh, this guy's really, you know, he's fallen, and
Yeah, it's not really specified in
changes
the
it.
play. It's not really
Yeah,
specified in the play either. If anything, there is a funny scene around that that is in the play. There's a little girl, right? Her name's Fanny. She's the little daughter of the servants, right? So it's Alfred's little
yeah,
kid. So at one point he comes home drunk, and he's all like he gets the doll. I believe it's the character. He gets the doll, and then he's just like, "Oh, you have a doll, huh? F your doll." It throws it in the fire, and then Fanny screams,
yeah.
and then they
Storms
just
out and screams. Yeah.
yeah, and then he kicks him out or something, and I was just
Well,
like,
it's a very interesting scene because that is basically what happened was Robert. So the other family, the rich family, is Robert and Jane, right? Jane. This is years have passed since the Boer War, and Jane was visiting her friend who worked for her. I forgot her name. And what's his Ellen, right? I think it's Ellen. Bridges is their name. Alfred Bridges and Ellen Bridges.
yeah,
So she's visiting them, and Alfred is out getting drunk or whatever. And they all know each other. They've known each other for probably decades or whatever. And maybe not decades, but a long time.
hmm
And she says something. I remember she says something like he's injured. He's in the hospital or something. He hurt his leg, right? He's
yeah,
actually out getting drunk, right? And then he like that moment when you're talking about that scene. When she's getting ready to leave with one of their sons is there, Robert and Jane's one of their sons.
yeah, yeah. They
He
got two. They
walks
have two of
into his
them.
house. Yeah, he walks into the house drunk at that time and makes a scene, and then they leave because he's drunk and they were leaving anyways, and then of course he's not thinking clearly, he's intoxicated, and
Right.
he says they're snobs and they're looking down on me, blah 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 blah, and he's making a fool of himself. And she brought a gift for the kid, for Fanny, the doll, and he's like, we don't need this doll. I don't know if he tore the doll's head off or something, and he's like, what the.
Well,
What are you doing,
when
man?
the in the play he just throws it in the fire and then Fanny
He
screams
throws it
and
in the
I
fire.
just
Okay.
imagine Fanny screaming like they do in the Charlie Brown
Yeah.
cartoons. They go up in the air like ah. I don't know, but by this point when I was reading this thing, I was like, I needed to make it entertaining in my head. But yeah, I mean that all that stuff happens, and at one point he forces the girl to kiss her, like you don't want to kiss me, your own father. I'm like, bro, what the?
Yeah. Well, the kid's afraid of him, and
Yeah,
even the wife is, he's embarrassing, because he's drunk all the time. And it's,
yeah,
you see in the beginning of the movie, he wasn't like that, of course. He was, you know,
he was an upstanding gentleman.
I wouldn't, I don't know. He was decent, and a decent family man. And, uh, and then you can just see that in the spirit of time, that has gone by, he just
Yeah, alcohol
falls
change.
apart.
Yeah,
And
alcohol changes him. Yeah, and then he gets run over by a fire horse truck thing.
yeah, essentially Fanny runs out after he destroys the doll, and he chases after her to get her back inside because there's stuff going on in the streets, busy, and then he ends up getting run over by a carriage or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a fire horse carriage. I don't know what the hell it's actually called,
Yeah,
but yeah, before fire trucks, there were carriages with little water pumps or
yeah,
whatever at the behind it. Anyway,
yeah.
that's how that whole saga ends in the beginning because we're going through periods of time, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
after that, we basically get into some time later, some years later. So now Ellen, Alfred's wife, owns the pub, and they're
Yeah.
running it and stuff. And then one of the sons of the Marriotts, who are the affluent family, he grows up and he is in love with this girl called Edith Harris. And
Edward.
then
Yeah, that's Edward.
yeah, and then they're at the fair and stuff and the beach, and they're just having a good time, which was pretty well set up. It looked pretty good. There was an interesting scene where like there was a stage and there was a prize that was won, and then one of the kids is like a brat and just like cries like ah! That kind of took me back to when I was a kid when they had that kind of stuff and that sort of thing would happen.
Yeah. It got
so
annoying though because the kid was yelling and screaming for like it seems like 2-3 minutes in the movie,
yeah.
and you can't do that when I was growing up. My parents would smack
Well,
me like
yeah.
stop crying.
Yeah, well, these are white kids, so.
Yeah, I mean,
But
and
but if anything, that this is where they, Edward and Edith are just chilling on the beach, and then that's when they witness the historic flight.
yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, that was a moment that goes by real quick, and then when you see it in modern 21st century eyes, you're like, okay, it's just a plane, so what? But then when you look up the historical relevance of the thing, you're like, oh, if you were there at that time, you know what that was. So just the mere sight of it was enough to make you go, oh, I know what that is. But of course,
yeah.
It means nothing to us now. And then soon afterwards, we get into one of the funniest parts of the film, which is like Edward and Edith decide to go on a cruise, and he decides, I want to marry you. I love you, blah, 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 blah. And the whole conversation starts with him going like, you know what? They talk about death in a weird kind of way, right? So they're just like,
Yeah.
I forget the exact conversation, but it was something along the lines of like, oh man, imagine if we were to die right now. Wouldn't it be so great because we're at our highest spirits? I don't know. It could be completely wrong, but they talk about death on some level. And then they had this long conversation back and forth. As soon as they leave, that's when you see the buoy with the words Titanic on it.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah. You know what they're on, Yeah.
It's supposed to be dramatic and shocking, but it just comes across as hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah.
I laughed when I saw that.
Cartoonish.
I laughed when I saw that. It was so funny.
It almost reminded me of something a segment they would do in remember that show Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction?
Oh, is that with
It's like
Jonathan Frakes?
Yeah. He took over after the first season, hosting it.
Commander Will Racker.
And exactly. And it kind of reminds me of something like that. Like the twist is, oh, it's the Titanic. So obviously what happens to Edward and Edith.
No, tell me what does happen. I don't know what happened.
They were rescued.
Oh, then why was it so sad later on in the film? Yeah, I mean, the sinking of the Titanic is just one of those things that
it wasn't 1912. That was 1911. See, nothing happened that year.
Oh yeah, of course.
Titanic sank in 12. So.
Oh, okay. They completely got everything wrong. Well, anyway, I mean, with the Titanic sinking and all that, I mean, that only resonates really because it was an interesting event. It was a freight, thing built on hubris. Oh, this is unsinkable.
Right,
it will never sink. And then it fucking sank. And then a lot of people died, because of the recklessness of a few rich ass people that built the fucking thing.
It was well over 1,000 people died.
Yeah.
I think it was like 2,000 people.
Yeah, but it really only gained prominence because a certain Academy Award winner, a certain Best Picture winner revolved around the Titanic many years later. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it became one of the biggest, or at one point in time, the biggest film of all time. So of course we're going to remember what the Titanic was, Well, of course
it was big news. I think back then. I mean, it was. Well,
so was the historical first flight. So was World War I. But those things are not. But those things are all but forgotten in today's society. But the Titanic is still ubiquitous. I think so.
I don't know.
I mean,
I'm not sure.
maybe world history.
Something like the Boer War, I would say, is more not obscure but very specific because it's specifically between the English and the Dutch, or English and the Boers.
Keep in mind, I'm born in the
So
USA, so
yeah,
maybe in
but
world
I think
history, it probably is still relevant, and maybe some people still remember all that, depending on the
yeah,
region you're in, obviously. But
yeah,
Titanic is just one of those events that everyone worldwide knows what that is.
exactly.
So
That's true. Yeah,
so imagine if this thing was a vignette, a series of events of like things that happened at that point in time, but now are completely forgotten. This film would just be completely and utterly irrelevant.
yeah,
So I don't know. It's just interesting to think about on that standpoint. But anyway, that happens. They died on the Titanic, whatever. Then shortly after that, many more years pass, and then we get into World War One. Then we get to
yeah.
the other kid, the other affluent child named Joe, who's now a
Joe,
grown
yeah,
ass. Yeah, he's a grown ass man. And now Fanny, the little girl whose little doll was torn up or thrown in the fire and stuff like that. Well, she grew up to be a stripper, or I'm sorry, a dancer in a nightclub. So, and then they come back together, and they're like, "Oh, I think I love you. Oh, sure, I love you too." And then his ass goes to World War One. Then his dad's there, so they're like,
yeah,
"Oh, son, snappy to see you here," whatever the hell. And then towards
yeah,
the end of the film, he dies. So, and then the whole film basically ends with the elderly Jane and Robert are like, let's celebrate New Year's Eve, even though our entire lineage has ended, and and we have nothing really to celebrate for. We're going to celebrate anyway because out of pure habit. And that's how the film ends, with this really weird montage of war, which is chaotic. It's erratic. It's confusing. It's just kind of a, I don't know. It just kind of was just like, we've already seen Wings. We've already seen All Quiet on the Western Front. We've seen many, and there were other
correct.
films during that time that came out concerning war. They were really well done, I imagine. Then he had this piece of crap. It was just a really messy montage of war, and
You talking about the scene with the shots within the shots and the
yeah,
soldiers
yeah,
falling and collapsing? Oh yeah, yeah. So that scene specifically, you have these soldiers collapsing. It's World War One, and they have the shot, and then they have another shot on top of the shot.
yeah. They stare at the
Makes it
camera and they go and then they fall.
yeah, and it's fine for a bit. It does have an effect, but not only the soldiers. I don't know if you noticed on the left side of the screen, you see Jesus on a cross. Did
Oh
you notice that?
no, there's too much stuff on the screen.
The soldiers are covering most of. Sorry, I'm going to say that again because I think I hit the mic. The soldiers are covering most of the screen, but in the left side of the screen, you can see Jesus on the cross while this is all occurring. And the soldiers are just falling over and over and over. Look, I mean, I like how it was shot, but man, they just put it on repeat. Like it went on for minutes. I
Well,
feel like it went on for
yeah,
minutes.
that's the real problem. It just kept going, and it just seemed like a really messy avant-garde montage happening.
Exactly. I could see the effect that they were trying to have there, but after a while, we get it, man. You're not making it more emotionally impactful or anything. It's just honestly starting to make me a little irritated.
Yeah,
And
it was just noise.
All Quiet on the Western Front utilized that same technique, and it's common in film, right? I mean, Apocalypse Now did it way later, decades and decades later, and it's a great technique. And when it's used properly, and
Yeah,
and it's like it reminds me of it's like learning how to do pinch harmonics on the guitar, and then you just keep doing it nonstop in the song you're writing.
yeah,
It's like, hey man, take it easy. You don't need to overdo it. Unless you're Zach Wilde or something, and
yeah.
that's his signature thing. But in general, the technique is a good technique. It's just, you don't need to overdo it.
Exactly. No, I agree. And that's by the end of the film, I was just like, well, I wasted my time here. So, I mean,
Yes.
honestly, I ranted and raved against Grand Hotel, and I declared that was the worst Best Picture winner I've seen thus far. My God, it's almost as if after I said that, Cavalcade was just like, all right, hold my beer. I'm going to show this guy something. You want to see a piece of shit? I'm going to show you a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I got to say, though, unlike Grand Hotel, at least I laughed in this film. They were unintentional. It was unintentional humor, but at least I laughed, and at least I could generally follow what was happening, even though I could care less about any of these characters. At least there was a little something there, so I can't say this was the worst one, but it's pretty fucking bad, though. It's, oh my God, it's just like, if I were to rank them in terms of worst to least worst, it would be definitely for me Grand Hotel, this fucking thing, Cimarron, and then Broadway Melody.
Okay.
That's what I would do so far. Because,
Yeah.
honestly, I really thought Broadway Melody was as worse as it was going to get. But the longer this thing goes on, the more I realize, what, Broadway Melody wasn't really probably all that bad compared to this other shit that I have been forced to watch. I mean, it was a shorter film.
Well, that's another thing. I'll definitely. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, honestly, I didn't really enjoy it. This film, it's not a bad film in my opinion. I just really didn't enjoy it much. I wouldn't watch it again. I think it's like you'd mentioned in the beginning. It's just another example, a prime example of what the public interest or taste was at that time, in film and whatnot. And it's just, I don't know. Maybe this movie holds up better than some of these other ones, but I didn't really like it that much. And one thing we didn't mention, well, you actually just did, that it's pretty slow, man. Like the first half hour is like, okay, were we finally getting somewhere? And then it finally picks up, but then it stays kind of stagnant for some time. And then it rushes a bit and ends. And then, so there's some major pacing issues with it.
Yeah.
It's an hour. I think the movie was like an hour and 50 minutes or so. It was just under 2 hours, but it felt like 2.5 hours to me, at least.
Yeah. It was like never ending torture. If anything,
so you have all that dialogue. Of course, that's, partly to blame. There's many issues and there's not enough, action for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I know.
And when there is, you're not even being presented it in a way that you can absorb it because you're still looking at the characters, right?
We're not very interested.
For example, you said the procession.
Yeah, I mean,
so like the Queen scene, the procession, and all that, and the funeral procession or whatever they were doing. You're just looking at them, looking at that, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, they needed some,
Well, the problem was, it's just like it all hinged on these characters, and it all hinged on us caring about these characters. But at the end of the day, it hinges on these characters being interesting, which they were wholly not interesting at all. Even if they got drunk, even if they were being belligerent, even if they were dying in part of a historical event, who cares? That was my opinion at the end of the day. It's like, who gives a damn? And of course, this is a problem in the original play too, because here's an excerpt from the dialogue from that play. So this is a scene concerning Jane and Robert, the matriarchal and the patriarchal of the wealthy family. And Jane says, "I wonder if the boys are asleep." And then Robert goes, "Snoring, I expect." "Oh, no, Robert, not snoring. They both have perfect tonsils. Dr. Harrison said so." "Inherited from their mother, dear. You have the most exquisite tonsils in the world." This is the level of writing in the original play. And I had to deal with this whole thing. It's a 132-page play. That's the kind of writing from very beginning to very end, and there's music scattered. That's another thing we forgot to bring up. There's musical numbers in this film. But
I definitely want to touch on the soundtrack.
Yeah, so you might as well get into it, because that was the thing I totally forgot, and I just remembered, oh yeah, there was music. There's music in the original play, and there's music in this film too.
And in this movie, it's kind of all over the place. I mean, there's some ridiculous old jingles. Some of them are really silly. I think I laughed a few times when I heard it, like Yankee Doodle, and they played what else did they play? When Johnny Comes Marching Home, famous. But sometimes they did have some classics. Once again, just like Grand Hotel, they utilized Johann Strauss. So this movie also used a lot of Strauss, which I like. I also heard Frederick Chopin, who's usually associated with nocturnes. If you hear one or two of his songs, the piano work, you'll recognize it. I think most people will know that song. They won't know it's Chopin, but it's still good. And he's not on the Mount Rushmore of composers or anything like Mozart and Beethoven, of course. But he was good. He was a damn good piano player and a decent composer. But yeah, I like classical music, and so I like when these movies utilize it, and sometimes they do a good job, especially when some of these, like Chopin, for example, a lot of it is great for emotional scenes, the piano work, and sometimes they don't use it when they should, but it's not as bad as just throwing it in there for no reason. But yeah, but it was odd because they had great classic music and then they had like silly old tunes, and so
I just recognized they had music, and I was like, oh, I guess another musical number. Sure. I mean,
when I hear specific things, Mozart, Beethoven, Verdi, Chopin, whoever, then I'm like, I know that. I like that. That's great. And,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, classical music. I mean, it's it's
you can capture a lot of emotion in the scene if you use it right.
of course
And
2001, Looney
yeah,
Tunes
exactly.
cartoons. I mean, just like it depends on, and not just 2001. Stanley Kubrick constantly put classical music in his
Correct.
films. Clockwork Orange is
Correct.
another notable
Clockwork
example.
Orange. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think he played a lot of Beethoven, I believe, in that one. So,
Yeah.
if anything, though, I mean, like, yeah, the music's there, but
And Johann Strauss.
yeah, but the music's there, but there's nothing to it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Just like in the play, because I read, not only did I read the play, but I also heard the play, and they actually had the musical numbers in there too. And I was like, oh, okay, it's
Yeah.
one of those things, I guess. It's a musical play or something.
I think that's part of the problem with the movie is the movie is like 80% of film and 20% of play. Like what we're presented. So
Don't you
it's
mean
just
that?
very odd. A
Don't you
couple of
mean
these scenes.
don't you mean that the other way around?
No, like this movie, most of the time you're watching a movie, but there's a couple times you're like, they do know that they're not on stage in a theater play, right?
Well,
That's what I
you said
that's what I mean.
80% of movie, 20% of play.
Yeah, I mean like yeah, what I
I'd
mean
say it's the other way around.
okay, I don't know if it's yeah.
I'd say
Most of the
I
time you
felt
can
like I was
tell it's a movie, but
eh, I
it's
get
just a couple of times how where they are positioned when they're looking at the camera when they shouldn't be kind of thing and in dialogue and stuff. There's a lot of times that it's like as I mentioned earlier, it's a bit strange and maybe they were just I don't know if it was deliberate. I can't imagine it being the case, or maybe it was I don't know a habit. I have no idea, but those are things I notice in it, and it's a bit strange. And you don't have that problem in Wings and All Quiet on the Western Front and things like that because those are just real films. They're just you know written for movie
well
for the
those
pictures and
well those you could tell those are movies
the
because
real movies. Yes, correct.
yeah, because of the way that the actors were acting, the way that they were acting amongst each other, the way it was
Yeah,
framed, the way the actors were blocked. It was film blocking, whereas in here it's play blocking. You can kind of tell.
yeah.
So I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I I don't know, man. Just like this thing sucked. It was boring. I didn't like it. That's all I could really tell you. It's
Yeah.
astounding that I was able to talk about it for as long as I was able to because this was one of those things where this thing was playing. Oh, Academy Award winning Best Picture winner. Let's see what this is all about. 5 minutes
Right.
into it, I'd be like, I'm done. I'll just watch like a review on it or something.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I totally I get it. I think you dislike it more than I do. Just like Grand Hotel, I think. And but yeah, I definitely would never watch this movie again. Once is enough. But I'm glad I watched it to be honest. And it's it's I don't want to say it's worth watching once because there are better movies to watch, especially of that year, as we mentioned earlier. But it's not terrible. It's not bad. It's just not a good movie in my opinion. Uh,
Yep, I agree. So
there's a lot of things they could have done better. I liked the fact that I like when movies are trying to intertwine the events that are chronicled and they're taking things from history, historical events, and trying to make it impactful. These events to the in the writing, and affecting the characters, and I think it's a really great thing. We've seen it all the time. This was just a lot. They try to do a lot of things, a lot of events, and it just doesn't have the impact and you don't really get that development. And like you said, the characters, you're just like, eh. And the ending itself is kind of anticlimactic. I get it, but it ends kind of how it starts. I didn't feel any impact, considering all these events happened and the full of tragedy. And are you supposed to have a happy ending or a sad, depressing ending? I get you don't want it to be too dark and depressing, but that's what most of the movie is like a bunch of bad shit happening to these families. So I don't know what their approach was, how to end it. I mean, because it kind of inherently is sad. I mean, especially since the
it's
parents at the
supposed to
end,
be sad
yeah, I mean,
anyway.
the parents at the end lost both their sons. Now at the end of the movie, they're old and they're toasting a New Year's like the beginning of the movie, but both their
Ah,
sons are dead. And
lineagens here, Eileen.
I mean, just thinking about that makes me sad. Like that's freaking extremely sad. But you don't have that impact in the movie because it's kind of all over the place and it doesn't really, set in. And I don't know. I think I see what they were trying to do, and I commend it, but I don't think it had the result that they were hoping for. At least not for me.
Well, the thing is that this whole thing was written by this one guy, right? Noel Coward. And this
Yeah.
just read to me like someone's diary, was
Okay.
left lying around. You read it, and then you realize you read a diary of one of the most boring people in the world.
Mm.
That's what this thing read like. It's like, you know what I like? I like Queen Victoria. I'm going to write about her. The Titanic, I read that on the paper. Let me put that in there. Oh, the flight of French guy. Oh, yes, we have to write about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was a great time in my life. That was a great, momentous time in my life. So many wonderful things happened during my life. Me, 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 me. That's what this thing read like. Or that's what it read like that, and it also felt like that watching it. It viewed like that. Like it was about this one dude chronicling his life in this thing. And then at one point he's just like, oh, it can't be all about me. Oh, no, I'll have to make up a family. Okay, I'll put me as a woman, me as the patriarchal, me as a little girl, me as... That's what it read like. Or that's what it presented itself as. So I'm like, yeah.
The time frame in which these events occurred in this British movie. I mean, this is a very British movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a British cast, and so the time frame, I think it's 1899 to technically the movie ends at 1930, I think. Yeah, most of the movie takes place between 1899 and I think pretty much 1930, right?
Yeah,
and
present date to the film, yeah.
Yeah, and of course most of it is, or a huge part goes up to end of World War One, which is 1918, and so it's just you have all these events, and these are events that would affect a lot of people at that time, especially in that region, right? It makes sense. But it affecting this family so much directly, I mean, why stop at that? One son died on the Titanic, other died in World War One. What if they had another son? Like, what, he died a few decades later on the Hindenburg?
Yeah. Well, no, a few decades. Didn't the Hindenburg happen around that time?
Probably in the late 30s, I think 30s, 37 maybe. You might have to look that up, but I could be right.
Yeah.
Late 30s for sure.
I'm looking it up right now.
Why I know that?
37. It happened only like 4 years
37,
later.
I called it. Yeah.
So
I don't know why I know those things, but
history buff, remember?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but I mean, that wouldn't have happened yet, but even still, it's just like, yeah, I mean, these people could have had like 5, 6 kids, and they would have all died tragically in some sort of form or fashion. One ended up being a vaudevillian. Oh, he died because when he choked on one of the balls he swallowed or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this movie is trying to present all these things, but I still don't quite... You're taking on this story about these two families that come from two different, classes, and I don't really know I still don't know what it's about.
Here's the thing. I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Okay, so the main idea behind this whole thing is kind of interesting. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking snapshots in history and you're having them being represented by a wealthy family and a poor family who happen to be living under the same house. Right. And their children are mingling with each other and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, even as kids they're just not eloped. Yeah. They're not eloped or they're not romantically involved. But they're interacting with each other. They know each other. And then they grow up and there's a little bit of a more romantic thing happening and whatever. And through their eyes, through these very human, regular people eyes, both rich and poor, you get to see these major historical events happen during that time period. Right. All the way to the end. So, I mean, like, there are films that have done this sort of thing, and it's not a unique concept, but, like, famously, Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Forrest Gump, the way that guy was written, he goes through so many historical events through the course of life. But the whole point of that movie, the whole point of that character, he's such a very unusual person and is going through so many unusual circumstances because of his unusual stature, that he just happens to stumble upon historical events. It's done in a very charming, kind of manner. It's done in a very way that's engaging. It's interesting. It's something that keeps you glued. Whereas in this one, it's just like, okay, you got these people in these historical events, but what's unique about these people? Why do we care about these people?
Yeah, I think they they show these events. Either they don't have enough details for us to really feel involved in it in a sense, or like I said earlier, that the way I look at it is the movie is about change, right? Change over time, change in society, change in attitudes.
Changes.
For example, when the kids when they're grown up, and from each family, the Marriott family and the Bridges family, obviously they're from two different classes, and at that time that's an issue, and so they're like, oh, this isn't going to work out, and then but um, Ellen says, this is what we have to do. Times are changing, and it's more acceptable now in society and whatnot. And so, like, they throw in a lot of that in there. They just don't really go into it.
It's extremely dry. It goes over your head because it's extremely dry. It's
Yeah,
like a
they
very
don't go into
boring
anything in depth.
conversation. Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
boring conversation that happens concerning those very important societal changes and this and that.
Well, it's also the timing of it. Some of those scenes is very strange because that's the thing with the movie. Nothing gets to be set. Like, you don't get to sit with it for a bit. You just kind of, for example, that scene is the scene I remember. She's telling her, well, they're going to get married, blah, blah, blah. And then immediately she gets the telegram or the letter saying that Joe died in the war.
Yeah.
Like, that very same scene. So,
Yep.
yeah, I don't know.
It's a very much.
This is a movie that could have been
it's,
like.
and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. It's like
it's easy to, and you can process it easily, but it doesn't make for a great storytelling. Like, for the audience, you're just like, okay, we're going through this and A, B, C, D.
well,
all this,
it's like I just said, and then this happens. That's like
Exactly.
the form of storytelling you can ever do. It should be like, but then this happens, therefore this happens, so then this happens as a result of that. That keeps people engaged. But when you have a bunch of and thens, it's like that scene in Do Where's My Car? And then they go on the Titanic, and then they die, and then World War I happens, and then
exactly, man. I mean, that's essentially what it is. I mean, it's that's part of the issue with it. It's just not written that well, man. Like, I don't know what I think this movie could have been a lot better if they did it. But you could say that about a lot of things, but in a lot of films. But
I'm going to declare right now, this film should have been a lost film. This film, it should have been lost in a vault fire somewhere. This did
crazy,
not need...
man. It's crazy how many good films were lost. In 33, I think it was 33 when the Ghoul came out. That's a Boris Karloff movie. I'm pretty sure that movie was lost for 80 years or something. I don't know. You might have to check that out, fact check it. But
I don't know about that film specifically, but there were a lot of interesting lost films.
I'm pretty sure that came out in 33. Yeah, and Boris Karloff, legend, and big fan.
You would probably know more than I do. I don't know, but if anything, though,
Ghoul, it was called The Ghoul. I think that came out in 33, maybe 34.
Well, if anything, during the time when Broadway Melody won, we talked about the movie about a Russian Tsar.
Yes, yeah.
I forgot what that film was called, but that film was a lost.
Patriot. It was called
The Patriot. The Patriot, unfortunately, is a lost film.
Yeah,
and I think it's largely due to the fact that it was not selected as Best Picture. And from what little I saw, because there are trailers and things like that survive, that looked like an infinitely more interesting film. So imagine if that won Best Picture, this film would be better preserved.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Instead of Broadway Melody, for instance. Broadway Melody, in my opinion, should have been the lost film. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't care if this is a hot take or not, but some films are not worth preserving, man. I mean, some films are just like, maybe if you were to look at it from the lens of like, this is how people operated back in the day, but it's just like, there are just some films that are unfortunately lost, and you could tell they were better films. You could tell that there was something to them, and unfortunately, they're just gone forever. And so we'll never know.
Sometimes they reappear. I just looked up. It was The Ghoul, 1933, Boris Karloff, and it was lost for many, many decades, and then eventually found in apparently in Czechoslovakia at that time. Czechoslovakia.
That's a whole different, but lost films is a whole different conversation, but it's very fascinating.
It is,
what has been lost, what has been found. Famously Joan of Arc, like the complete original copy of that film, and I believe that film came out in the 30s or 20s or something like that. That film was in an insane asylum. Like it was found in an insane asylum, like a complete, almost pristine copy, and allegedly it's because, the guy who ran the insane asylum just happened to really like the film and wanted to see it for his own personal, use or something. I don't know, but again, that's a whole different conversation. Lost films. All I'm saying is this should have been a lost film.
This should have been a lost film.
Yeah, this movie. I give
not
this,
even like if you could exchange it for one lost film, you're just like just lose this film.
Yeah, just lose it. Throw it in the dumpster. Just set it on fire. This film.
I didn't think it was that bad. It just wasn't.
Wasted my time. This film. Set it on fire.
We'll get that time back. That is true. It's okay. I mean, I'm alright watching it once. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
you went to greater lengths as always. You read the
I read the play. That's why I'm bitter, because I go through greater lengths, and then I realized this is not worth the salt. It's not worth the paper it's written on. This is not worth the celluloid in which it was developed and filmed on. This is not worth it. However, this is what it is. But nonetheless, I can't say I entirely regret watching this film. It is a relic in history. It is something that won Best Picture. It is something that, there are interesting moments here and there in terms of like, this is how people thought back in the day. These are the ideas that were espoused. This was the music that was played during that time. These were the things that were important to people during that time, at least in this very specific, myopic cultural lens.
Exactly.
All that being said, I give this fucking piece of shit a 3 out of 10 because the Titanic thing made me laugh. That was funny. The drunk thing was kind of interesting when he got run over by the fire carriage. Yeah, that's it. Fuck this movie otherwise.
No, you ruthless.
I hate this
ruthless
movie.
motherfucker.
I hate it. I hate this.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this movie a 5.5 out of 10. Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of like maybe I would give it somewhere between a 5.5 and 6, and I'm like, ooh, no, I don't.
6?
Think so.
How would you rate this a 6?
In between 5.5 and a 6, so like a 5.7, 5.8.
I put the Michael Bay movies at a 6. The Transformers films, those were a 6 to me. Those are barely watchable films.
Yeah. No, I think I'm gonna stick with a 5.5. I think I'm a little generous here, but yeah, 5.5.
I guess. Well,
the effort was there, I think, and they just
they made a movie. It's 3? A movie.
Damn. I don't think I've ever rated a movie a 3 before.
Oh, I did it already. Grand Hotel.
Right.
No, Grand Hotel was, I think, a 2. That's even worse, I think.
A 2.
Because at least Cavalcade, there was stuff in it. At least I felt something in terms of laughter at inappropriate times, but nonetheless, Grand Hotel, still the worst thing. Begin then, felt nothing except, a deep seething hatred of having watched 2 hours of my life coming and going. And not just the movie, but the book as well.
I think that was 2.5 hours. I think that movie was 2.5 hours.
Even worse. I mean, just like...
that was a long movie.
Yeah, that and the book, which is atrocious. At least this play was 132 pages. That's fine. Versus Grand Hotel, which is like a 300-page book. Oh my God, that was pure torture to sit through. Oh my God. Just like... Yeah, but anyway, we just made our ratings. I never want to see or hear this thing again. Oof, in the trash it goes. So guys, thank you for tuning in to this episode of our Best Picture Winner series. Catch us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Not necessarily Best Picture winners, but other stuff that we do on the side.
Absolutely. Be sure to check us out. Thanks for tuning in.
Yep. So all right, guys. So until next time, see ya.